So our learning objectives for today, really around just learning about our technical targeted technical assistance model. Three big ideas that we want to focus in on today. What skills and actions are needed to deliver targeted technical assistance? Then thinking about why targeted TA meets the needs of our partners. And finally, the how targeted TA can be applied in your context. So this image just kind of gives you an idea about how our three-tiered TA model looks. We begin with our universal TA, which is our again that's universally for all. We have the targeted TA, which we're going to spend a lot of time discussing today, and that'll be followed up with intensive technical assistance. So just to kind of break those down, the models down, universal technical assistance is a little more passive. It's driven by the recipient, right? So it's newsletters, blogs, guidance documents, just trying to share as much information as possible to the masses. As we increase the intensity for our three-tiered technical for our model, we think about targeted technical assistance, right? Which is a little more collaborative, network driven. So their virtual opportunities. So that's what we're going to spend a lot of time discussing today. And the idea is just how do we share knowledge and how do we think about problems of practice and resources? How do we support each other when we think about the work? And finally, there's our intensive technical assistance, which is it's an active and on-site virtual and training. Virtual portions happen as well, but there's training and coaching involved with that. Um, Trying to increase knowledge and skills when we think about implementation, really focusing on infrastructure. How do you build this infrastructure and how does it support the use of your practices? If you're excited about that and want to learn more, um, there will be a webinar August 11th at 3:30. So there's a brief coming soon as well. So trying to give you a little preview for that, right? Now, let's just jump into how we look at dissemination and implementation supports. And what we've tried to do is align the outcomes and the intensity of the support. So we think universally, letting it happen, right? There's minimal support, just disseminating information and trying to make sure that you're giving you the opportunity to let it happen, right? You want a little more support, we think about helping it happen, right? So thinking about more targeted support using the information that we have, right? So there's a limit on the training, but we provide materials, training, and then just direct you, kind of provide a little more guidance on where to go when we think about the websites and the materials that are used. Finally, gonna make it happen. This is really intense where there's just direct provisions of materials and training resources. The support is intensive and focused on systems change, where we spend a lot of time thinking about training, coaching, and the data systems. So underlining that and the through line through that is there's an accountability for outcomes throughout, but it's just again, what's your the level of intensity that you're looking for at that specific time and where you currently stand. As we think about the aim and the research surrounding this work, just really thinking about going from just individual and organizations and teams to build effective evidence-based practices, but not only to build them, but be able to build them in a way that they're sustainable. The ways we think about doing that are just, improving the knowledge, skill acquisition, and performance quality. So that again, what we focus on is not just building something and having a one-off, but building something and saying this was actually doable and also sustainable, and also we can improve this, right? So it's not just a one-time thing. We've implemented, we've got our desired outcome. Now we want to ask the question, how do we make it better? How do we continuously improve? Right? While also considering you have to build that general and innovation specific capacity because we want, again, building systems to last, and you have to have the capacity to do those things and who we can lean on. Because, again, we don't want to build systems around individuals. We want to build systems that last because we know individuals occasionally leave. So, as we get into the target technical assistance, we're going to jump into the why. First of all, it's a little more cost effective. Virtual allows for more opportunity. Um, it just gives an opportunity to reach out to more partners that otherwise wouldn't have the ability. So again, that virtual option is great. It can strengthen educational systems, build the capacity of our educators, but also thinking about how we can grow our special education workforce. So when we think about the virtual option, thinking about this, what we're thinking about the why, again, that cost effective piece, especially in these times, is something that we focus on. Because again, our goal is to make sure that we're enhancing outcomes for all students, particularly those with disabilities. And I even think about, we've talked about, we mentioned, the staff, but really supporting them and providing them what they need to be successful leads to student outcomes. As we continue, just thinking about targeted technical assistance to what? Here are just some features we talk about. We're going to discuss the format and duration, whether it's offsite, if it's short term and time limited. Um, the resources that we will share, and this is going to be dropped into the chat. So you'll have access to the AI Hub, our Active Implementation Hub, which there is just a plethora of materials and resources that you can use. Just I always laugh and say, try to reach out and find out what are you specifically looking for because you can go down a rabbit hole. There's a lot of information, so we don't want folks to become overwhelmed. Um, Also, when we consider engagement, it's just shared learning, just looking at those artifacts, the tools and the strategies that we're all using. And also, again, we've mentioned before, just we want to think about the outcomes. For this one, we're thinking about the collaborative problem solving piece, right? How do we work together? How do we solve problems? And we recognize that we have similar challenges throughout. So that's been a lot of me talking. Can we jump into a quick waterfall chat where we're just trying to think about what are the critical components that you would share with a colleague about targeted technical assistance as you've learned a little bit about it briefly to this point? So, what are some of those critical components that you say, I could take this with me and I could share? And feel free to drop those into the chat.
I have to establish a good working relationship. As you were asked that question, Corey, I kept thinking how many times you use the word collaborative.
Systems shouldn't be built around people, they should be built to last, definitely.
Having clear understanding of the goals, defining the terms for duration and format. Yes.
Also, just the distinction between letting it happen, helping it happen, and making it happen. I think sometimes we stand at different places, right? And we have to determine where we are within the work.
And I'm seeing a thumbs up for that helping, letting, and making. Anyone else? Yes, I think that of that as intentional doing. Absolutely.
All right. I think we've practiced the, oh, here we go. Um, Understand our purpose and how to best get outcome that we're being mindful of capacity. Exactly. Um, there's lots of things going on. I'm sure your plates are full. Recognizing, identifying the capacity do we have? What does capacity look like to implement these innovations? Doing with rather than doing to, definitely.
And as we continue, do feel free. to add thoughts that might pop into your head into the chat as we go forward, because now what we want to do is really describe how you can use a community of practice for targeted technical assistance. So let's define communities of practice. So way back in 2018, OSERS identified communities of practice as specialized targeted technical assistance. And at SISEP, we want to use that specialized targeted assistance because we really felt like we could have some high impact if it was contextually relevant to those that we served. So we had to really think about what content was needed in order for that content to be contextually relevant, right? And that means we have to ask those that we're working with, what would be useful to you? Where do you find the strongest needs? And then lift that back up to the team at SISUP to design those communities of practice again. So we're actually beginning to co-design the system. And the implementation specialists at SISUP then take that information, design, deliver, and facilitate each of the communities of practice. And so, as you can see, it's participant driven. So even in the early stages, we talked to those that we were about to serve and asked them, what are your biggest questions when you think about this idea of developing some real strong skills around using implementation science? So again, using feedback from those we serve for the design and the delivery, and also for the evaluation. So we also want to think about the research, right? We don't want to go forward with something until we've considered what's known. And there was really a lot of information around this idea that targeted technical assistance, and especially using a community of practice, is an organizational and conceptual framework. And for us, it was really intended to integrate that educational research and the professional practice that those use for continuous improvement across the spectrum of education. And the other piece that we really saw is the importance of the fact that it's a social process, right? We bring folks together who really share a common concern, a common set of problems, a passion about a topic, so that they can strengthen and deepen their knowledge and expertise. And it's not just about a common concern, but they're sharing the things that are working well with one another and things that another may not have never thought of. So it's this amazing exchange of information in any community of practice. And there are some foundational design concepts, right? We always, and you've heard me say it already, right? We're drawing on the expertise and the interactions within the community that we've gathered. And the practice is reflective. It's always reflective. We're developing this formal knowledge so that we can take the knowledge from theory and research and close that gap to put it into practice. And the participants were always drawing on their lived experience and the lived experience of those they're serving. So we can really begin to think, what is the real need and how do we serve that need? And there's a structure, right? We have a shared area of interest. We have a collective identity. We have that structure for collaboration and mutual field of interest. So we always are focusing on that structure for collaboration and using the feedback that we're receiving to determine, is there enough collaboration? Are we leaning on it too much? Do we need more information gathering or delivery? So always thinking about that social structure and balancing collaboration with the learning. This idea of a compilation of shared resources, tools, and strategies is so important because that's where the learning happens. We're discussing things with, certain topics within a COP. We're sharing resources that it just grows and grows the resources that we share. We might be sharing something on an organization's PDSA cycle, and then another organization will share their resources. And then what happens is an organization can take back that compilation of, let's say, PDSA processes and make it their own. They've got a template and an example, and they've got stories from those that they're using that share what worked and what didn't, right? That's really important. What didn't work for us, if you might want to pay attention to this and not try it. And then, of course, taking those shared resources and sharing them with the broader community to advance learning. Like today, we're going to be able to share with you from those that we served what they learned and some suggestions that they have. So today we're going to now really going to hone in and focus on one of our COPs. And one of the COPs that we've been operating for 3 years, next year will be our last year, is a COP with our Institutes of Higher Education. You'll hear me refer to them as IHEs as I go forward. And I see a number of folks in the audience from IHEs across the country. So that is wonderful. And our goal, and developed, this was a co-developed goal, was to support the teaching, sharing of ideas, and application of implementation and improvement science, practice, and research into their courses of study for their inspiring leaders in education, all focused on improving outcomes for students with disabilities. And again, that was a shared goal that we developed together. So in year one, which was 2023 to 2024, it was a foundational launch year and dissemination. Every year we learned and we disseminated something about our learning. We had 6 virtual 90-minute sessions. And participating was Portland State, University of Delaware, University of North Dakota, and University of Washington. And as a foundational year, we focused on the use of the active implementation formula and frameworks. So if we think about effective practice, we think about a usable innovation. Whatever it is that we're going to use, we have to have common agreements on what we will see and how we will measure it. And if we know what we want to see and how we'll measure it, then we can develop the effective implementation supports. We know what training and coaching is required. We know how to measure it, and we know we want to approach it in a stage-based way or a phased, some people think of this as phases, right? So we're going to explore before we actually put everything in place. We think of it as installation. So we can go into initial implementation and so people have what they need to get started. We multiply that by that enabling context, right? We've got teams that are meeting and using data monthly, implementation data, training and coaching to see if they're improving outcomes. First, for example, in education, teacher outcomes, teacher practice, and then student outcomes. And of course, in that enabling context, we're using improvement cycles, perhaps a plan do study act cycle. So we're constantly, we have a plan, we implement the plan, we see what worked and what didn't, and we go again. If we can do that, we have socially significant outcomes achieved within 3 to 5 years. And we all know math. If we have a zero anywhere, well, the outcome will be zero or less than perfect or 100. So that was our foundational year. We really focused on those active implementation frameworks and implementation science because what our IHE said was we need to know more about each of these 5 frameworks. and the practices that we can use and integrate into our coursework. So they were constantly looking at what was on the AI Hub, the information we were delivering, and then integrating it into their course syllabi. I can remember after in the first year when we presented on the implementation drivers, in the feedback, one of the IHEs said, I had a class that night and I integrated it into the class. That was so powerful. And then that person shared at the next COP how they did it. But so we're disseminating our learnings too, right? Everything that person had, all the strategies and the supports they were able to share. And then after every single session, we're collecting participant data. We give them time during the session to give us that data so that we can use it and respond to the needs in the next training. That year, we had a poster presentation at the OSEP conference, and we had two of our IHEs joining us there, the University of Utah and Portland State. So it was a powerful presentation, and actually having those who experienced it to share it with other IHEs. And here you can see participant impact. We looked at four categories: sharing and collaboration, sustained integration, effective use, and increased knowledge. And you can look down this column and see some of the things that folks said about how they valued it, how they incorporated it, how it helped them conceptualize, and how it reinforced the importance of implementation science in action. And again, after each session, we collected this data, but at the end of the year, we would establish our goals for the next year. And something that we got clear from IHEs is they actually wanted some homework or some pre-learning. And so that was integrated into the second year. So now what we want to do, Chris Borgmeyer, a PhD from Portland State University, was one of our participants. Chris and I actually started working in implementation back in 2008, and he was very curious to be part of this and to see how things had changed and how he could strengthen his coursework for his students. And so we asked him, why did you choose to make the time commitment to join the IHE COP, and how did it add value to the PSU educational doctorate program? And Corey's going to open up this video and we'll get to listen to Chris. Thank you, Corey.
And I'll
Hi,
start it.
I'm Chris Borgmeyer from Portland State University, and I have been involved with implementation science for I don't know, 15 or probably at least 15 years. I had the pleasure of going to I think a week-long training with a team from Oregon back in the day, and ever since I've recognized and appreciated the critical role of really focusing on implementation. And in my role as a faculty member at Portland State University, had the opportunity to really work on developing an EDD program focusing on change leadership, where we were recruiting practitioner leaders who wanted to remain as practitioner leaders in the field. And that is, absolutely that research to practice gap. Implementation science is such a key support in that process. And so a few years ago, as part of that grant, I was at the project directors conference, and I saw that Kathleen and colleagues were having a session on implementation science and starting a community of practice. And we had been using in our programs previously all kinds of the implementation science resources, which are just so helpful, such a incredible resource. And quickly was recognizing and learning that there were more and more updates that I wasn't keeping up with, and so started having some conversations with the team there and wanting to really incorporate implementation science into our program to support our leaders. And we kind of developed a little partnership to kind of they really supported us with a course, and we actually had our students taking the implementation science micro credential and earning a couple of the initial badges. And so our students were, these leaders in the field were just deeply appreciative of the opportunity to learn about implementation science, to access all the tools and resources and knowledge that comes from that we've been learning all about in this community practice, from all the SISEP and NERN resources. Um, so it's just been an incredible partnership, and then to be able to come together on a monthly basis with other schools where we get to share and learn from one another, share the successes that we've experienced and the challenges that we've had in teaching implementation, which is it's a challenge. It's a great challenge to be able to implement and lead interventions and systems change. So it's been just such a great resource to one, learn about all the new resources and have more in-depth discussions about some of the nuance and the details and how we go about training and supporting our leaders and our students to really use and maximize the instruction and resources around implementation science. So it's been a wonderful opportunity that has really been helpful in continuing to develop and shape the way we provide instruction and support, and thinking about how do we represent this in the ultimate dissertation and practice or culminating project that our leaders are doing, which ultimately is to really address the rigors of implementation and supporting real change in their organizations. So very grateful for the opportunity to participate in the IHECOP for implementation science.
So if any of you know Chris Boardmeyer, he is a real champion for implementation science. So do feel free to reach out to him. I know we have a live IHEs on the call today, so I do want to note that he is also part of the Carnegie Project for the Educational Doctorate, and he's a champion for how you integrate implementation into improvement and really use that throughout their dissertation project. So if any of you are members of CPED, look him up. He is at most of the events. And then I turn it back over to you, Corey.
All right, Kathleen. Everyone should see my screen. Sorry for the technical difficulty. Um, So as we pick back up, we're going to jump into year two, which was 24, 25, around just co-creation and dissemination. So we followed the same practice around the six virtual 90-minute sessions. We had three additional IHEs join the CLP. We had the University of Arizona, the University of Utah, and Utah State University. And we also had our four universities that continue to participate. So you can see those universities. Wanted to highlight those who joined. Um, as we continue, we focused on at this point thinking about what did dissemination look like. So we started by focusing in on our IHE purpose to product, right? So just this was designed, the design of this was basically to focus on outlining the features, benefits, and purpose of the IHE COP to guide the work in year two. So we wanted to make sure we built that out and documented it so people could see our, the purpose to product, how this work has been created and how this work has moved. There was also a SISEP blog that was written on how to prepare a skilled educational workforce. So just thinking about the IHEs, thinking about closing the research to practice gap while working within a community of practice. So those links have been shared in the chat for you all to review as we continue. Now, we jump into the year two participant impact section. Again, just trying to break down what was learned during this year. Big thing was just making sure there was lots of discussions around the practices that were relevant to embedding implementation science into courses. So there's lots of communication around that. Also, learning from others how they've embedded these practices and principles into their full program. So things we've had try to pay attention to. We wanted to gather feedback from others. Again, that was the purpose. Again, the overarching purpose is learning from each other. So the learning is gathered from throughout the IHE CLP has been great for the group. but also just trying to align not only the changes that people could make to their course, but also just thinking about what tools do I need? How can we clearly communicate this and what's the path? And then we just try to, again, as Kathleen has mentioned, after each session, we want to respond to the participants, right? This is for those participants who selected to be a part of this community of practice, and we wanted to make sure that we were responding to their needs and their wants and their requests as far as where do we want to go next. Um, at the conclusion of the year, we started thinking about our year three focus and just taking a deeper dive into the use of our soft skills, the application and sharing of our IHE products. So that was going to be the focus for year three. So let's go into year three. Um, Going deeper to close the research to practice gap. Again, following those 6 90-minute sessions, we had one additional IHE join, and then we had those 5 universities continue to participate. So built some momentum, and we've still had folks who still enjoy working with each other and still have folks who are willing to join. During year three, we discussed the active implementation frameworks and formula. Kathleen gave you a little overview earlier around the formula and the frameworks that support the work. And then we jumped into the implementation support practitioner competencies. So just thinking about looking at those, as we mentioned, the soft skills of implementation and what that looks like, and around just thinking about the three big ideas around co-creation and engagement, ongoing improvement, and sustaining change. So when we consider impact here, things we knew when we discussed just sharing and collaboration, it was great to know that others in the country are invested in this work. When we think about the sustained integration, just learning from others and thinking about different ways to embed the work into the topics that we're working on. Also, just thinking about how we can use the resources that are currently existing. So not always trying to recreate something or create something new, but looking at what's already here and what can we use and how can that support the work. And just when we think about the knowledge, the feedback we got, again, people enjoyed it and they liked the sessions, but really just as we mentioned earlier, there's a lot of information, sort of providing a guide and just, you know, giving the materials just in time for participants as we're going through the work. Again, when we think about our data collection and how we use data, just trying to be responsive for every session, gathering information. How do we make this better? Looking at that feedback, having those, and just thinking about some interviews to start thinking about year four, where we're going next. And that's really around just co-creating a focus and then just evaluating what happened this year in year three and going back and evaluating those soft skills, the resources that we shared. So we've tried to build in these things, whether it's there were some case studies that we put in that were incorporated into the work, and just thinking about where do we want to go next for this group, that we're meeting their needs. So as we continue, we're going to hear a quick video clip from Megan Pell from the University of Delaware, and this is really just around, how did the University of Delaware Special Education Administrative Leadership Program make use and benefit from these tools? So let's play this video for you for one moment. Let's get this queued up. Right, and everyone should see.
Here at the University of Delaware, the Special Education Administrative Leadership Program, SEAL, makes great use and benefits terrifically from the tools and the resources and strategies shared by SISEP. And our IHE colleagues seem to take into account how useful all of the resources are. I just want to comment on our use of the implementation support practitioner competencies. We are currently infusing those in our action research activities and have leaned into the Institutes of Higher Education colleagues for ideas on how to embed those competencies into our coursework. We're so excited about this advancement because we know the efforts on behalf of our scholars and their action research endeavors really work to improve the outcomes of students with disabilities, and they're overcoming common challenges. And while they're learning implementation science through the tools and resources and strategies shared within the community of practice, they're learning to implement, adapt, and sustain their action research efforts.
Yeah, I really want to speak to something that Megan shared here before we go on to our waterfall chat, and that is in year two, at the end of year two and the beginning of year three, we really spent a lot of time in dialogue with our IHGs about what was next. What did they really need to learn themselves? And what was missing for students? What was difficult to get this idea of the research of implementation into practice? And they said the soft skills. And it was a real aha for all of us because we were focused on the active implementation formula and hadn't thought about actually introducing that to our colleagues, our IHE colleagues. And it's just an example of you have to engage in the dialogue and give people enough time to really surface some of the challenges so that you can say, oh, we know what we can leverage. We can leverage our implementation support practitioner competencies. And so immediately at the beginning of this year, we went back to the 5 active implementation frameworks and integrated and showed how you could use the support practitioner competencies to strengthen those soft skills. And guess what? That's going to be what we do again next year to go deeper because they're really focused on, strengthening that workforce. And as students learning a lot of technical skills, they also need to learn the soft skills so they can put it into action. So I just really appreciated that Megan pulled that up because she put it into practice right away. And she had great examples to share. At this point, we really wanted to focus on 4 key indicators of success as we reflected on the COP. So, one, build capacity to sustain change from day one. Every time I see this word capacity, I think of one of my professors when I was a young student, Rob Horner at the University of Oregon. And he would always say, if you can't sustain something for 10 years, don't invest in it. So just think for a moment. How many investments have come and gone in 10 years? What if we started with this idea that we have to build the capacity to sustain this for 10 years? So we know we have to ensure the sustained and effective use and evidence-based practices long term. That's what's cost effective. That's what helps remove this idea that this too shall pass, but that we're really invested in this. And I want to take just a moment here to make sure we all really understand that use of implementation science, it's not a new practice or a new evidence-based opportunity, right? It is a way of doing work. Once you learn implementation science, it lays on top of everything you do. And that's something I think it is so important that people know from the onset. This isn't something that's going to go away. It's going to change the way we work for anything so that we can sustain it long term. So we know we have to develop, whoops, just a second on that slide, Corey. I'm sorry. So, right, developing the knowledge and skills, we have to develop that capacity. We have to support our participants in what they choose to use and always leveraging, always thinking strategically, listening, understanding their readiness, understanding what they have to leverage. Because when you are in an organization and you are so close to the work, sometimes you don't see what you can leverage. I was in a meeting with somebody just the other day, and the team lifted up 2 things that they could leverage. powerful, powerful things that they could leverage. And they looked at us and they said, we never even thought of that. Because when you're so close to the work, it's hard to see. And as implementation specialists, right, that's what we all need to do. Watching body language, listening for what they can leverage, and making sure they write that down as an action item, because that's going to maintain lasting systems change. Thanks, Corey. So provide strategic and personalized support. I think you heard this from throughout today, right? We always want to tailor our support based on the needs that those we serve. And we can't tailor it if we haven't asked them. And you can't just ask, but you need to allow them to really think about it and give them time to surface what their needs are so that you can respond. Because in the end, it's about advancing the selection, adoption, and sustained use of whatever it is that they want to implement. And it can only happen through really fostering that collaboration where they're really focused on solving the problems inherent within their systems of change. And then, lastly, or another thing is we want to strengthen the educational environment. So you heard us talk about we want to develop the skills of the professors at the IHEs to integrate implementation science so that they can then teach it to their students. And then their students can use it within the districts that they are about to serve. So really, it's really strengthening the workforce at the IHE, at the student level, but then also in the districts that they serve. So it's really developing widespread capacity so that we really bolster that educational capacity to enhance the outcomes of all students, particularly students with disabilities. And again, we've said it, we want to really develop that educator workforce. And the third piece that we focused on, or that was just an aha for us, is to build cross-agency coordination and community engagement. And so most of our IHEs were able to share what they were learning with other departments and other colleagues. And so they were able to actually spread use of implementation science at their IHE. And that was really powerful and encouraging. Provide direct support for active implementation, right? That we started with this today. We really want to help people see how they can integrate active implementation into their coursework. It's a foundational resource. We our IHEs from starting in year 2 said we need to really close the research to practice gap. That was part of their problem of practice that they co-created. And then they also were really, as you saw, interested in their third year of how do we integrate those ISP competencies. So as we know, we've talked about it, we have to give time to recognize the needs of those that we serve, personalize that learning specific to their implementation needs that they're lifting up from those that they serve out in the community. And one thing that we really helped support our IHEs in using was the SISEP learner pathways because it provides a roadmap for use of all of the activities on the AI hub. And so they were able to look at this pathway and think about, I know this, oh, but this would be the next step. And so they were able to also just improve and continue to do some self-learning using the ISP or using the learner pathways, which we have linked and also put in the chat. Great resource for extending learning. So again, we've done a lot of talking today, and we've just got a few minutes left that we would love to open up to lingering questions and wonderings. I'm imagining there's a number of things that you're wondering, well, what if, or and then. So just give you a moment to think about that, and then we can share our
Kathleen,
thoughts.
we do have a question, a couple of questions popping up in the Q&A. The first one is, I wonder about dose response of the COP learning structure. It sounds like the IHEs met every other month for 90 minutes. That seems like minimal dose. But the participant impact statements were pretty juicy. I'm assuming there was a focus of application and continued learning in between meetings. How did you all help to make that happen?
So I think the dose was just about all that they could handle in reference to getting it into their schedule. They had very busy schedules with teaching and their research, but we had high attendance. If we would have tried to do more, I don't think we would have been as successful. And they shared that with us. This seems doable. Number one. Number two, remember the first year we didn't expect them to do anything in between meetings because we didn't feel like they probably had the capacity. But they said, no, we do. We want some extra learning. So starting in the second year, we always gave them pre-learning, and then when we started the next COP, of course, we integrated that pre-learning into the content. The other thing that I realized we didn't mention today is that we would ask the IHEs to choose a date, one of the COPs, to share something that they were really proud of, something that they were really successful with. For example, they would share their course syllabi and how they integrated implementation science into a lesson. And so they had enough time to do that, and we started that in year two. But I would say it was a bit of a heavy lift because they took it so seriously, and they were so explicit and thorough in what they shared, and then how we all worked with the material together. So dose, I think it was pretty much the perfect amount of dose.
We have another question about how the universities got involved. Like, what was your selection process, and how did they find out about it? And how did you identify them as participants?
So Chris talked about he was at the OSEP conference, and there was a presentation that SISEP did around the community of practice and the opportunity to join the IHE. So that was where we got our initial participants from. And then it grew from there. For example, we had a um, Institute of Higher Ed professor that was part of our micro credentialing, and we found out that they also had a OSEP funded DED program. So we invited that person to join us. We also had a few IHEs that asked if they could join just because they knew somebody at SISEP. So that was another way that folks joined. And the selection criteria was, can you attend these meetings? Can you commit to this? Can you commit to a small team of one or two folks that will make this commitment at your university? And will you integrate, or have you integrated implementation science into your course syllabi? Most of them had already had implementation into their programs, into a course of study, but they wanted to go deeper. Anything else about the selection criteria that I missed, Rebecca or Corey?
I think you got I was just gonna add, I think the important thing around, in addition to the second selection criteria, was just the excitement about thinking about how they could embed this into their work. And it wasn't initially, it was just how do we get administrators to understand this, until the idea changed, kind of flipped to all the students need to learn about this, because eventually some of them will become administrators versus focusing on one or the other. So I thought that was a great thing that started out, like those initial conversations were great as far as how do we make sure that all the students are aware of this.
I think we have time for one more. This was in the chat and then also in our Q&A around this idea of implementation soft skills. Can you share more about the implementation soft skills and the approach you will use to support their growth?
So we rely on the implementation support practitioner practice profile that you have a link to. And we integrate and we ask our IHEs, because they're somewhat familiar, we actually had them review all of the skills and hone in on where they wanted to start. And we actually started with sustainability and integrating that into implementation teams. And so it's driven by what they need and what we have, and then it's up to us to integrate, to teach how to integrate one of the competencies into the frameworks, a framework, and then give examples of how students can use it. And then what happens is, like Megan, she comes back and shows how she integrated into a course that next week, into a lesson, and then it just grows from there.
Okay, we have about 3 minutes up, 3 minutes left, Kathleen, if you want to wrap us up.
Well, we thank everybody for joining us today. And I think, Corey, what we've learned, right, is COPs, they're high impact and they're cost effective. So it's a way to really bring people together, always remembering their needs have to drive your COP. So keep that in mind if you're thinking about, this might be a viable option for our organization. We also want to highlight the fact that we'll have our Universal TA webinar on August 11th at 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Our targeted TA brief will be available soon. It's in the final edits, and it will be sent out when we send out the recording from this webinar. We also talked about 3 products from our IHEs: the presentation, their purpose to product, and the IHE blog, which are all attached here. So we thank everyone for coming today, and we hope you have a safe either ride home or walk into your kitchen to get something to drink. Have a lovely day.
And please complete the webinar evaluation.
Oh, thank you, Corey. The evaluation is in the chat right now. And as you saw, we use evaluation data to improve. So please, please, please let us know what you liked and areas that you think we could have strengthened so that we can then respond to that and strengthen them. Thank you. And the link to the webinar evaluation is in the chat.